Here we go. So, dear Kim, I am happy that you are here, that we're going to have this conversation because I invited you to be with me in Seattle at the end of this month or towards the end of this month for an amazing opportunity to work together. And my invitation came from watching how playful you are, how spontaneous, how much you know how to improvise as a jazz singer. And I think that's a interweaving with stalking wild psoas
Mm.
is voice and vibration. And I know that you have healed yourself using continuum when you were deeply injured. And so that you know from the inside out what fluid expression, what biomorphic movement does for us. So speak to that experience maybe a little bit. Introduce yourself to this little introduction for both of us. I'm Liz Cook, and my website's Core Awareness. And I'm going to have a Stalking Wild Psoas workshop that focuses on vibrational sound and how it moves us rather than what we think of as singing. You have such a different perspective on voice. So
Yeah.
take it away, girl.
So what did you want me to start with? How I found continuum?
No, not necessarily, but the fact that you did find continuum and that it's been influential in working with sound. So people who are interested in voice need to know. You mentioned in one of your, like, why are we doing this conversations, that fluid body makes for voice. So
Oh,
there's
for
people,
sure.
yeah, so
Yeah.
there's singers who might want to know about this idea of moving deeply within your own core.
Right. I think you can think of it as it's an invitation to uh, all kinds of people who might be coming at it from different directions.
Exactly.
So one of the things I've noticed over my years in continuum and being in those places is that sometimes I think for very good reasons, there's a delineation between continuum practice or any sort of somatic interior practice and song. It's kind of like I've seen even, you know, very well-known teachers come into my studio and they can sound, they can tone, they can do all these things, but the minute it moves towards something that we might call singing or song, which is something all of nature does, really, um, there's a stop sign. I don't go there. I don't do that. And so that's the territory I tend to work, even with people who are really familiar with finding the sensation of sounds on the interior and not attending to what it sounds like. Um, and then there are singers or people who want to sing who come to me, and I need to sort of melt away all their ideas about what singing is because we've been given culturally, at least, you know, where I grew up, we were given the Von Trapps. You're given this very frozen body, um, and or we're given someone on a microphone who's using electricity to amplify rather than being amplified, having their own body be the amplification, or a relationship to a space be the amplification. So I tend to work with both kinds of people and any range in between. Um, but the main thing is that I think for so many of us, um, we feel the release from having to perform so much when we just make sound on the interior of our bodies. But then when it's time to stand and say something,
Mm.
we lose the feeling. We lose the connection with the feeling, or we lose the connection with the space. We sort of fly out into watching ourselves. And so I'm very much interested in slowing down that space between free play in the body, where there's no attention to what it sounds like, to understanding the use of the ears when we go to speak.
I love that. That's fabulous.
Or when we go to
Love that.
sing. And really,
Yes.
our ears can't hear that much of our own sound. We're meant to just feel sound.
Oh, great.
And I'll often hear someone who can send sound right down into the nooks and crannies of their knee bones, and then they come out to speak and the voice gets cramped up here
Yeah. Yeah.
because now I'm speaking.
Well,
And
you brought up the also I know on Facebook you mentioned, and I quoted you, or maybe it was in your newsletter.
yeah,
How odd or strange the relationship of uh, Psoas, like the fact that I'm a conceptual artist, but somehow I ended up teaching Psoas workshops, um, and and it's partly because of that, crooks and nannies. It's the depth of our uh, it's the depth of the psoas as tissue, as fluid tissue, when it's not fluid tissue. Okay, when it's been recruited for safety, when it's been recruited for
right.
injury, when it's recruited as a way of showing up and feeling safe. Some of what I'm working with now is the impulse of, as it's part of the fear responses, um, people wanting to control the very interior part of their being so that they do feel safe, whether that's what we call self-regulation, or
Yeah.
all these different strategies that are now presenting themselves. And
Can I can I interject?
yeah,
Self-regulation or poise or
okay,
performance.
yes, performance. And those are all masked by what's really deeply fluid and beyond human within the tissue of our being, of our real primal gestures. And
Mhm.
as I explore those, there's a there's a genuineness of expression that is purely, as you said, all life sings. And to be able to be in that field, to not be performing, and to
Mhm.
truly show up, is not about control. It's about play. It's about innovation in the sense of responsiveness. In other words, it's a more complex nervous system. It's a more
Mhm.
complex organism that truly expresses, you could say, its destiny, its desire, its longing to 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 show up.
Mm. Yeah. And
And that's the connection between SOAS and what we're doing.
I would just go a little, no, I wouldn't go further. I would just set next to what you just said about expressing its destiny, its longing. And I'm going to read you back to yourself, Liz Cook.
Okay.
So before I came on this call, I said I'm gonna just pick a Liz Cook tarot card. And I went to your website and I looked at your blog and I just randomly picked the blog called Being Human. And you started out with a quote by Ursula K. Le Guin. And then you wrote exactly, precisely about this territory between being in interior space with absolutely complete freedom within that container, to coming out and being in a wider container of the group and still maintaining connection.
Yeah.
And you wrote about that. You said you were talking about writing your book, Stalking Wild Psoas. It felt to me like I was dreamed. The book was dreamed. It transcended my thinking into not something I needed to express, but something that needed to be held. And, you know, for years I've been called an expressive arts teacher, or that's how I'm billed. And I'm almost allergic to the word expression because it sort of means from my mouth out. And then
Oh,
how many likes do I get, so to speak?
right.
And really, expression is a response to impression.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in many ways, I'm an impression teacher. You know,
Mm,
if you're deeply impressed, then this expression springs right out.
I
Anyway, I
love
just
that.
want to say that's where I feel I intersect with you,
Yeah.
that something needed to be held. And so, in the field of my presence, the way I worked with it was to set aside my life and offer myself as this space of holding, a container, a bag, a womb in which gestated a book that when I read it today, I know it's moving through my tissue in language, but is bringing an energy that is not mine, but ours. And what I was going to say, I want to sit next to what you said about its longing, its destiny. We interpret that often as my longing, my destiny.
Right.
And I really think the territory that's opening up for a lot of us is that we can be so connected in that we we reach something that's ours, not just mine,
Yes.
not just my expression, but our expression. And that requires a sense of the outer world and a deep sense of the inner world simultaneously. And that's the territory that I'm thinking we'll move around in this workshop.
Absolutely. So we're meeting on June 20th to 22nd. It's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We start midway on Friday, and this really is a collaboration. And when I work with collaborations and when I work with Stalking Wild Soas, I don't have an agenda. I have I have a repertoire of play. I have toys. I have ways of responding, but it's a discovery. It's a territory that we can't define or create boundaries around. And both of us are very experienced teachers, and so one of the things I love is the ability to actually show up and be moved. And I don't know exactly where that's going to take us, but I know it's going to be an awful lot of fun. And I know you have a way of viewing the way you work with these sounds that move into dynamic ways of, I work with sound to get a vibration going, and you take it at a whole nother level with all the experience you have. You want to speak to that? How you might
Yeah.
play with that?
Yeah. I mean, we just have such funny delineations between singing and dancing and somatics. There are all these funny things. And I'm interested in the integrity of somatic experience, the desire to stay connected to tissue and bone, to stay here in the body, not to fly out of it,
Yes.
and then to encounter something musical and to understand, how do I never know quite how to say that the musical ideas we've received, these great gifts, they're both embodied and they're cosmic. So just something as simple as going from do to re, that's the European way of saying it, in some cultures, like in North Indian culture, you spend several lifetimes understanding how to travel from do to re. Like they aren't just things you memorize and move on and make something out of and get some money off of. They're spiritual experiences, they're touches of the divine in the creature that we are.
Mm. Mm. Ooh, I
And
got chills. Ooh, right
yeah,
up my spine. Ooh.
so I often call the voice the divine creature. Like you have to keep going back and forth between really the divinity. Music is perfect. The distance from do to re is a perfection. It's just a perfection, like the sun is a perfection. And it can touch my tissue. And it doesn't have to become performative at all. It can become a very deep inquiry, which is a continuum word. Like, how can we stay in inquiry and explore some of the principles of music? Or of song. And we're not going to go all the way to big song form in this class. That's too much. I'm still learning how to do that. But we will move from vowel impression expression to maybe a couple of scale notes to maybe a small medicine melody, and and understanding that we have a lifetime of conditioning that says, I'm singing, am I any good?
Mm-hmm.
And that
Oh,
that
so many people are terrified of just the idea that we might sing.
oh, it's amazing, even in um people who are exquisitely free in their bodies. So it's a funny fence. It's not a funny fence, it's a fence, and I'd like to take it down because we're the only culture that separates those things.
Yeah. And I know when I use various forms of art, I'll often, bring paper and markers and, and to just kind of what I would call track some of our experiences of core. What when I'm in a stalking wild and I do that, the freeze response in people feeling so much shame and so much conditioning around and we don't even look at them. We put them aside. Where they're not visible. We're not, and we're not looking at form. The reason I do it is because there is, like melody, there are intervals, and there are shifts in that make it a process rather than an object, which is my whole work with my organism. It is a living process. I am a living process, not an object. So but when people get through that and they start to do it, they it's an incredibly it's not only taking the fence down, there's a deep nourishment there. There's a
Yes.
deep return to something that I don't know if it's a reclamation, but it's definitely transformative.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It'll be fun.
Yes, this will be fun. Thank you. Let's do
Okay.
this. We'll be there.
All right. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you.